Basketball fans, welcome into Raptors today. Today begins BHM, that's Black Heritage Month here with the Toronto Raptors and NBA TV Canada. So we take a step back from our usual, all right, let's go. I thought your phone was on silent. Let's start that again. Oh, we're live. Okay, we're live. So welcome to our Black History Month special. Akil Augustine, Sherman Hamilton, Paul Jones, and we are talking about BHM, the heritage of black people in Canada and across the NBA. And I'm going to start with Paul Jones. Jones, he's an educator. I want to ask, what does Black Heritage Month mean to you?
The month is a highlight of celebrations. It's a highlight of contributions, struggles, and things that are still evolving and ongoing. And it's a time that we highlight. But you know, I always felt this as an educator, that we shouldn't limit it to February.
Yep.
You know, I look at places now where we're trying to become more inclusive. I look at places like Virginia and Florida where they're trying to take Black history, the teachings, the things that we celebrate out of their curriculum, and really not trying to be equitable and inclusive. And I think it should be the exact opposite. As an educator, I always felt that it is a full curriculum thing. And when I became a principal, I talked to my teachers about, yeah, you can talk about Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb, but it was a black man that invented the filament that kept the light bulb from blowing. Does everybody know that? Just things like that. Like let's do a full education and let's put it in the curriculum. And the same way we put all the other teachings in and we recognize all the other stuff, let's recognize it too. And this month always brings that back to the forefront for me, that it's a journey, it's an experience, it's a celebration, and it should be all-encompassing. Yes, we might highlight it in 1 month, the same way we do for other things, but it's something that needs to be constantly at the forefront if things are ever going to change.
It's interesting you bring up the point of the traditional story of American history, which kind of is built upon the back of free labor.
Somebody else's history, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So that story in itself, when it's usually told, is told incompletely. Now, Sherman, I'd love to get to hear what you think the importance of Black History Month is, because I hear a lot of different arguments in my research. Like I hear people talking about it's a month of celebration for the black community, but I've also heard the argument that it's more of a responsibility on other groups during this month to educate themselves and to put the onus on them understanding the struggle and what's been placed on the black community. So for you, what does it mean?
Well, more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
So yes, it could be about the struggle. It could be about, other groups, opening their eyes, opening their minds up to the contributions of black people. There's no real, to me, definition of what Black Heritage Month should mean, because there's a whole smorgasbord of information that has been kept from people that if you're a lifelong learner, you should want to know.
Yeah.
And
you're constantly finding out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's an ongoing thing. So to me, I don't think you put it in one lane and say this is what Black Heritage Month represents. I don't think it works like that. There's too many areas, and as black people, we know we're way too diverse to be kept in one lane and be told our story in one dimension. We're more multidimensional than that. So I think to me, the biggest thing is people have to be in a state of openness, because you have to unlearn first to learn. And that unlearning process is taking a long time, I feel. And if that could be expedited, then the learning process can occur. And that, to me, is where the growth is. We all know people are stubborn and choose to be ignorant. We get that. But if you want to learn, there's a lot of information that you can be open to. So we're still in that unlearning phase, unfortunately. We've got to get to the learning phase. And once we get there, I think we're going to see a lot of good things.
It's why, again, I'll go back to my educational background. I always used to say to the kids, hey, man, it's your generation. You guys... because to Sherm's point, their canvas is still relatively unpainted. They don't have to unlearn. You don't have to cut things out of the picture and replace it with something else. So that's why, to me, education and getting to people early, and I just look at the acceptance of a whole bunch of other things now in our world that things that weren't accepted before that now are accepted. Why? Because we're getting to people early and educating them. I just, to Sherm's point, there's a lot that has to change before we can go forward.
And we have some of the best tools and teachers available, which are the people that the kids look up to, and one of them is Pascal Siakam. We hand you off to a message from Pascal Siakam during this BHM.
It means a lot, but also for me, I understand that celebrating Black excellence is not just about 1 month, and I feel like, we just got to continue to be there for each other, love each other, support each other, and I think that at the end of the day, like, as long as we do that, we'll be all right.
Yes, that's Pascal Siakam's thoughts, and I'll throw my 2 cents in. I think for me, the biggest opportunity we have with BHM is an opportunity like this, which is to get outside the echo chamber. I think a lot of conversations happen between groups of Black men, but we're given a platform today where Raptors fans who normally hear us, talk about the game and talk about the players, get to talk about things completely outside of that affect us and that affect other people. And I think that's the real opportunity. I can go on my social media and tweet and write whatever I want, but that exists in a certain echo chamber of people who kind of already agree with me. But here, we're kind of forcing the issue and putting it in front of other people and making them kind of take note of what we feel and what we think about these things.
We're conducting a different band, right? Because normally we preach to we conduct the same band all the time, right?
Okay, so one thing I want to pick up on is kind of a common theme when you talk about Black history or Black heritage. People kind of lump in all Black people into one story. So often we talk about the American experience and we talk about what happens in the United States. Now, the three of us I know are all of Caribbean heritage. So, Sherm, I'll start with you. How does your Caribbean heritage play in your experience of Black Heritage Month, and how does that differentiate for you?
It means a lot to me. My Caribbean heritage is basically responsible for who I am. When you talk about, coming from a Jamaican household and, being first generation Canadian of my family, you realize how much the things that my parents and my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles went through to get here. The lessons that they taught me. And it wasn't, as you all know, in terms of Caribbean parents back then, they're not talking to you. It's about showing you. They're showing you the hard work. They're showing you the discipline in a way that would be very dangerous right now. But you're being disciplined in a way that's going to really make you question whether or not you want to cross lines again.
If you don't hear, you must feel. That is a common chant throughout the culture.
It should be posted over the door of every Caribbean home.
If
you can't hear, you must feel.
Yeah.
Okay. But I would say this. We can all attest to the fact that the discipline that our family showed in terms of coming here, building something out of nothing.
Yes.
Making a life for us out of nothing. That kind of discipline takes a certain type of integrity and toughness that I don't know if we see happening nowadays.
No, we don't.
But we were fortunate to get it. Yeah. We were fortunate to get it.
Now, Jonesy, how different are the two identities? Because I think there's a lot of lumping in when you talk about the American and the Black experience, especially even here in Canada.
There are some similarities, but to Sherm's point, there are some huge differences.
Yeah.
And I think of my own upbringing in a very Jamaican household. I mean, just recently on my timeline, I tweeted something where I had some Bob Marley music going and a Bluetooth speaker, and it was a Bob Marley song about struggle, and it was a Saturday morning, and I tweeted out, I was cleaning the house. Because if you grew up in a Jamaican household on Saturday morning,
you're cleaning.
Leave ya till the thing clean.
You're
you don't go outside. Like, you can't do what you want to do till that is done, and that's part of the discipline, right? And
structure,
structure, and my father used to say that, basically, you may not like my methods, but you'll be good with the results. You'll be good with the results. And discipline, from a personal standpoint, when it's meted out, it's meant to form the will and not break the spirit. And I was lucky in that my dad was actually born in Nigeria. He lived in England, Nigeria, England, and then before he moved to Jamaica and met my mom. So he was a guy that was used to, hey, I'm somewhere else. I got to fit in. I know who I am. I'm hanging on to that. You're not changing me. I know who I am. But I can get with your program and fit in here and do what I have to do.
A world traveler.
Don't complain about the system. Try to learn it and make it work for you. And then when you get in, maybe you can make changes. So a lot of the American history is about enslavement and being subservient and not having a way to break out of that. Not that it didn't happen in other places in the Caribbean, because it
One
did.
of the original places
It did. It did. That's where it first happened. But there came a time when eventually you work your way through that and you break free of those bonds from a legal standpoint. Even those bonds are still on you socially, but from a legal standpoint, you are entitled to things now like everybody else, and you try to take advantage of that. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I got from my parents. Like, you're here, this is the system, learn it, work with it, but always be looking to make it better and change it so it can be more equitable. That's what I got.
Akil, I want to hear your perspective on this too, but I just wanted to say, I find the differences, and this was my experience. Growing up, I wasn't taught about slavery in my household or in my family roots conversations. That wasn't something I was taught. The American culture, they seem to talk about that. That's something that is spoken in the circles of black people fairly consistently at a fairly young age. My first experience was being called the N-word at school. Didn't really know what it meant, didn't even really know how to handle it, but I know it didn't feel good when I was in grade school. But I wasn't informed on it. I had to get informed on my own. And that's, I feel, one of the biggest difference between the American culture for black people and the Caribbean. Although, as Jonesy said, you talk about slavery, when you talk about the Caribbean islands, the indigenous people there were slaved on their own island.
Yeah, we are indigenous to
100%,
the islands.
100%.
We're a new coming group.
100%. So that whole idea was never, for me personally, taught through my family. I had to learn that outside because they were too busy hustling, trying to make a life.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest differences for me is the relationship to Britain, the largest colonizer in human history.
That is big.
Because I think one of the big changes when you get to the American black culture is there was a huge separation because there was a war between Britain and America. And so they kind of removed themselves from the relationship with the colonizer, but there were new tactics.
Right, but
that were brought in.
held on to the same ideals.
And some tactics were even more intense than the ones that were used by the United Kingdom. And then what you have in the West Indies, where I come from, not even yet first generation. My child will be the first generation because I'm actually born in Trinidad. I think there's a certain adoptive structure and there was a certain fealty to England that still existed, especially in Trinidad.
Well, Trinidad just got independence, and there's still the remnants of the British monarchy.
The school system, everything, uniform, all of that.
To speak of the Queen's passing, in certain West Indian islands, there's still a tremendous amount of loyalty to the royal family. And so I think there were things from British culture that were passed down. There was damaging effects of colonialism that absolutely usurped so much riches and so much human potential and power from the islands.
Yes.
But then I think when I talk about like even present day effects between someone I see coming from the West Indies and someone I see coming from the United States is there are still things like the school system, things like traditions that are present and prevalent in the West Indian culture that may not exist. And again, I'll go back with you on the N-word. The N-word probably was not used in the way in the islands that it was used in the United States. And that's just a remnant of that culture and how that played out.
There were other terms, let's put it that way.
Yes, there were a lot of other terms that were used. But the N-word was a new one for me when I got here. Now, what I want to talk about is the NBA next and its impact on the black future and black excellence. But first off, we hand them off to Gary Trent and his thoughts on black excellence.
It's representation of our history, the beauty of the struggle, of the bad in it, the good in it, everything that came with it, the makeup of who we are. Basically, it's our history. It's my history. It's part of our history. You know, it means everything to me. It's the base and the foundation of everything I am and who we are.
Now, we must give credit to the NBA, of course, for not only putting black men in a very visible position in our culture, but also for championing causes, right? Whether it be BLM, whether it be standing by social changes, LeBron James leading the way with the I Can't Breathe movement, putting those T-shirts on during a period where we were mourning and when we were trying to bring light to a lot of different things, whether it be the George Floyd situation or the Tyree Nichols situation right now. I want to talk about the NBA's role in kind of how black men are viewed in this culture, and your thoughts on what the NBA has done for black men and women, especially not only just financially, but in terms of how they're viewed.
Sports, our sports heroes are viewed as role models, and many of the NBA and WNBA players take that to heart and take it very seriously with their actions off the court. Never mind the fact that they're great athletes and great basketball players, but the things that they do off the court to promote social change, social justice. I think of Maya Moore.
Yep.
I think of that situation. And I'll go the other way in terms of opportunities in the NBA. And I am such a huge Chris Paul fan when it comes to his foundation and the things he's doing for the HBCUs. And he said, when I grew up, I didn't know there was a difference between Winston-Salem State, where I had all my AAU practices and all my basketball education, and Wake Forest, where he eventually went to school. He said, I didn't know there was a difference until somebody started to tell him. And the things that he's done in that HBCU circle, promoting them, giving kids opportunities. Like I said, the stuff that his foundation does. When the Phoenix Suns came to Toronto, I made a point of going into the locker room to talk to him about flying across the country and graduating from Winston-Salem State and, taking a private jet so he could walk the stage and giving every kid that graduated with him that day $2,500 to, hey, man, this might help you get started at something. Like, he takes that seriously. And, you talk about LeBron, and even go back to Miami with the whole, Trayvon Martin thing and wearing the hoodies and all of those kinds of things. They take their social responsibility seriously because, as one of my black basketball coaches told me, basketball should be a means to an end, not an end in itself. It should help get you somewhere and improve things rather than, okay, I've just played basketball. That's it, and that's the end of it.
For those who are unaware of what Maya Moore did when she stepped away from the game, I suggest that you do some research on Maya Moore's role.
Unbelievable.
To be considered widely one of the best players in a game and to walk away because of your efforts in social justice.
Hey, man,
that's huge.
That's Muhammad Ali stuff.
Yeah.
That's like Jim
and she doesn't
Brown
get enough
stuff.
credit for
No,
it.
not at all. Not at all.
And Sherm, your impressions of how the NBA has changed the perception of black people within our culture?
Well, I think a couple of things lined up, for the NBA. I mean, I think when you talk about the four majors, the NBA has always been a leader in terms of promoting social equity. But when George Floyd was murdered, and it was during a pandemic, I think the NBA really capitalized on an opportunity to say, okay, we've got everybody's attention, let's ramp this up by tenfold. And they gave NBA players basically free reign to say, tell us what you want us to do.
The jerseys on the
back. Yeah, let's have a conversation. Let's have some suggestions on how we can make this as relevant as possible, because they had everybody watching. And they did a great job of really creating conversation and really putting some things out there to make people think. Mm-hmm. And they've continued to do that. This comes from, David Stern's time. This moved into Adam Silver. And now we're seeing the players, and this is a big component. Financially, when you have the wherewithal to do things, you can do it and know that you might get backlash, but you'll be able to survive.
A certain level of independence.
100%. And now we're seeing that with athletes. They're having that influence that they can make decisions. And even though we're in a cancel culture, they understand that their resources are good enough to allow them to continue to push it. And that's a fight that wasn't usually able to be fought because,
you had to succumb to the dollar.
You got ripped out at some point.
Yeah.
So this is a different era. So the social movements are bigger, they're bolder, they're more consistent. And I think when you talk about the NBA, they've done, I think, the best job at making sure that they stay relevant with this topic.
If the march or the run to equity is a marathon, the NBA's 10 miles into that 26 mile marathon. They've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And as Sherm said, to the other majors, some of them are still back at the start line. Some of them are still putting their shoes on and learning how to, and wondering if they're going to run. The NBA is so far ahead of the other leagues, in my opinion, it's not even close.
Now, there's a conversation I wanted to have with you guys. Something that came up from famed scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something that
I saw this one.
Yeah.
This blew my mind, honestly, because I had never thought of it. Now, a lot of people have accepted in scientific circles that the human race birthed somewhere around the region of Namibia, meaning that people of Africa were the first collection of human beings on the planet
Cradle
Earth.
of civilization.
Cradle of civilization. And I think one of the things that we've lived with since colonialism is the European lens on anthropology. So one of the ways that a large swath of our human race has been defined is by skin color. And in Africa, of course, people are of darker pigment, woolly hair. So that entire collection of people were deemed black or ebony or whatever have you, term that you use in popular parlance. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson pointed out that if you were to look at the greatest range of diversity in whatever have you, the tallest collection of people on the planet, the Watusi tribe in Africa. The shortest people on the planet, well, that happens to be the Pygmy tribe, which isn't that far away from the Watusi tribe within Africa. If you're to look for the fastest people across long distance, that would be the eastern coast of Africa. If you're to look for the slowest people, the fastest people in short distance, you would look for the western coast of Africa, right? So it seems there's a large swath of genetic diversity, but we've all kind of been brought together under the flag of blackness. How does finding this piece of information out, because this is a relatively new piece of information for me, I'll start with you, Sherm, how does that change your definition of your blackness, and where does that tie in? Is it just the story of blackness that we've been told through the European lens? How does this change things? Because I feel like if we spread this information, it does change the story somewhat.
It can. Yeah. It definitely can. And this goes back to my point earlier. Are you open to that? Are you willing to explore that and understand that you're challenging societal norms and probably things that are ingrained and instilled in you and have been put there on purpose? Things that you got to really look at and say, okay, well, maybe that's not the way it is.
Right.
Maybe I need to open myself up to this and explore this and challenge it and look deeper into it. So if you're willing to do that, it absolutely can change. Now, Neil deGrasse is a brilliant human being.
Yep.
He's a smart man. And what he's saying it didn't reveal anything to me. It clarified.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I had known, I had known that Africa had all this diversity because we all come from there. So you can't have this world in the situation it is in. And if we're agreeing that the cradle of civilization is Africa, that's where the diversity started. So, but the way he broke it down was phenomenal.
Yeah.
It was beautiful the way he broke it down. I will say this. Say this. The understanding of that diversity has been hidden for so long, intentionally.
Yeah.
So now even our own people struggle to believe
I
that.
have a hard time with it. Yeah, absolutely.
That's the biggest disappointment and the biggest loss.
My mind was blown.
Because we won't tell our story correctly.
Well, and I'll jump on that, Sherm, in that when I started teaching, you don't know something till you have to teach it. And doing research around in February and Black History Month and all of the other stuff, and learning this stuff myself, as Sherm said, because it goes against, it runs, in counter correlation to what you've been taught.
Yep.
I had a hard time believing it. Wait a minute, is this? And then you start peeling back the layers of the onion. And when you get back to where it all started, it's like, no, this is true. This is true. It's like, right now I'm into ancestry and my family research. And going back and finding things out, looking at slave registries and finding out when we became free people, my family and all of these things, it goes against some of the things you've been taught. And I know when I first learned about some of this stuff, I put it in a box. Wait a minute, is this? It's like I had this secret here that this is true, but how do I let it out without upsetting the apple
Well, that's
cart.
an important admission because there's a coming home moment for all of us that
Right.
we'd like to come to.
And then I got
Time
to
to
the
upset
point,
the apple cart.
Exactly. And then I got to a
Time
point,
to upset the apple cart.
and then I got to a point. Well, you know what? I'm rubbing the bottle. I'm letting the genie out, and it's not going back.
Well, we're
in.
doing that right now just by having this conversation on this
Absolutely.
platform and bringing up these
Absolutely.
topics.
Absolutely.
I was completely embarrassed and ashamed when I went to school at VCU, and that was the first time, because at that point they weren't teaching about Black History Month. They weren't teaching about the contributions of Black people to society. That was the first time in a Black theater class that I learned that the Underground Railroad went through Canada. I was embarrassed as a Canadian.
Yep.
I was pissed off at my school system for not telling me that. And here I am coming to another country to be told about my own country.
Yeah.
Didn't like that at all. And it really created a bad taste in my mouth in terms of what the education system was doing.
Well,
I just want to jump in. The Underground Railroad, where it lets out in southern Ontario, southwest Ontario, former CEO of Maple Leaf Sports, Richard Petty, has a bookstore down there and has a huge event going on for Black History Month. And I was down there and looking at the settlements in places like Amherstburg, North Buxton, and the people that came through there, and educating myself again on those things. Now, this is years ago, but revisiting it and getting a refresher, it is embarrassing that it's not in our school system, and that kids that go to school that close to the museum are not walked over there for a field trip to say, here's what happened in our area.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, that's a perfect setup for my final question. But before that, I do got to give some props to the NBA, as they have assigned 31 grants across the NBA and all the NBA cities. And one of those grants happens to be in one of the epicenters of Black culture within Toronto, and that's Scarborough, and that's the East Boys and Girls Club in Scarborough, somewhere I spent time as a young man. So we got to give props to them for doing that. I think that's a huge move. The segue originally was about what we need to do as Canadians to further push the agenda of diversity and inclusion. And Jonesy, I'll start with you as someone who's been in a position of power before. Let's not leave this with the NBA in the United States. What needs to change here on the ground floor in Canada?
Unlearn and re-educate. That's it. Open people's eyes to the struggle and the past and what has happened and how inequitable it is.
And not just the struggle, but the bounty.
Yes. And then once that has been, like I talked about the box, once you peel back to the middle of the onion and you have that information, now you can understand how to go forward and how the feelings, the emotions, and how things need to change going forward. And let's not kid ourselves. Some attitudes never die. Like they say sometimes you can't kill a cause. There are some attitudes, some old-schooled, old-fashioned attitudes that have not changed, and as long as they're being reinforced and re-educated, will never change. So it's going to be a constant struggle, and that's what we have to do. We have to, for the young kids, paint that canvas differently. For anybody who's older and open and willing, unlearn, clear that canvas, and then repopulate it in a different way.
I'd say a couple things. Number one, when we hear about these things that are happening to Black people, we're usually focused on the States. Even in Canada, we're usually hearing about those things and picking up those causes. If we're to pay attention in our own country,
Carding recently an issue in Canada.
if we are to pay attention in our own country, we could point out some things that we could get behind and support as well.
Yes.
So I take it from a macro to a micro and look at our own space and figure out, okay, what's happening here
In your backyard.
that reflects things that we need to adjust. The second thing is, this is a great example of it. You're younger than me. I'm younger than Jonesy. There's different elements of life that we've all experienced generationally, that this sharing of information doesn't happen enough. And as Black men, especially, we have to have these conversations multi-generationally.
Yeah.
With action-based results.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing to me that really, when we talk about information, This is the best way to get information, right? Because either we're going to learn something or it's going to trigger for us to learn something. So I think these conversations multi-generationally are huge to have amongst black people.
You know what one of my favorite things to do is in our organization? Pick up the phone and call Mr. Embry.
Yeah. Listen, a wealth of knowledge there, and someone who I've had some great conversations with. I'm going to close the show with this simply because, for myself, I understand that here in Canada, one big difference between us and the United States is there are no black population centers outside of maybe Nova Scotia, where we can, in numbers, in mass, elect MPs or people to represent ourselves. You think about the United States and you think about neighborhoods and entire cities and regions where black is represented as a democratic force, as they're more than 50% of the population, and they can elect people. We saw the decimation of Little Jamaica with the Eglinton subway line going there, and that population not being able to run their businesses. And so the property was taken away from the people who run businesses there. So I think that's one of the huge differentiators is we don't have that political power when it comes to picking people to represent us. So I think we're at a disadvantage in that light. And so a huge opportunity we do have is with the Drake effect, with the effect of the Toronto Raptors, and that element of cool that black has always represented, is to allow that to trickle into other groups and other societies and join forces, whether it be with the Jewish community or the indigenous community, and allow that cool factor that we have to now permeate the next generation's mind and make it more accepting. Because I think the biggest player in equity in this country is going to be the corporate community. How far can we penetrate the corporate community so that there's upward mobility, upward movement, and some kind of black middle class that absolutely does not exist within this country?
Somebody's got to let us in, though.
That's true.
Somebody's got to give it. We can make all the noise, but until there's an opportunity given, and that's the hardest thing, cracking through to make sure there are people that look like us that's saying, it's okay for Akil to do this. It's okay for Sherm to do this. We're going to give Jonesy a chance to do that. Because until those opportunities are presented, we're bumping our head against the ceiling.
And there's truth in that, but that bothers the you-know-what out of it.
Yeah.
It really doesn't sit well with me, and there's got to be another way. And I can't subscribe to that in totality. I can be aware of it, but I can't subscribe to that. If that's the case, then the gatekeepers may never open the gate.
That's the challenge.
That's the challenge, yeah. That is.
Hey.
We have different ways of opening gates.
Well, that does it for this conversation. First and foremost, if you're still there, I want to thank you for tuning in and listening to our thoughts on this Black Heritage Month. These are the conversations that we need to push forward. We thank you once again on behalf of myself, Sherman Hamilton, and Paul Jones. A very vulnerable moment shared between us and you, and we hope that you pass these lessons forward. Take care.